topic is about identifying political platforms based on congressional tweets using NLP topic modeling and sentiment analysis. Twitter is a new political bullhorn, so it's more effective than traditional media in the sense that your followers are a good approximation of your constituents. A recent Pew study mentions that traditional media and Twitter share popular headlines, so a tweet is almost as good as a press release, albeit less binding. The 450,000 tweets by Congress users had a potential audience of 350 million people last year. So using Twitter as a focus group for political platforms just makes sense. The interactivity allows legislators to test the waters and fine-tune the topics that they want to push in their agenda. My goal for this project is to identify the top 7 topics that politicians would use for their political platforms based on Twitter data using NLP. So the workflow is pretty simple, just getting the data from Twitter via their API and TweetBee, and then doing some EDA, which includes cleanup and pre-processing. And I also engineered a feature called Reach, which I'll get into later on. So once cleaned, I ran the data through some sentiment analysis, and then I moved on to topic modeling, and then the end result are the 7 topics per party. So I looked at retweets and favorites and created a feature called Reach. Reach was used to gauge as a gauge to see how each topic is being received by the audience. The higher the reach a topic will have, the more important would be the topic as a political plank for the platform. The scores are weighted and combined to form reach. So I used VADER for sentiment analysis, valence-aware dictionary for sentiment reasoning, to analyze sentiment for each tweet. And the key takeaway is that generally Democrats tweet more positively. Republicans have less retweets and less favorites. So I guess a good side question would be, is it because their tweets are so negative that their reach isn't as good and they're not getting as much favorites? Sentiments from VADER and TextBlob, another library, will come into play with the analysis later on. I used NMF, or non-negative matrix factorization, for my topic modeling. It decomposes the document term matrix into 2 smaller matrices. In essence, it's a form of dimensionality reduction that helps us go from a ton of words to less words to a few topics in this case. And here's what the results of my modeling looks like for the 7 topics using the entire corpus or all of the tweets. So eyeballing each word per topic can give you a general idea, and domain knowledge certainly helps. But sometimes to verify the topics aligned with the words themselves, I would look at specific tweets with those words to verify. And on a few occasions, I'd actually have to rename and reassign topics to capture more of the content that I'm labeling. And here are the 7 topics. So you have COVID, voting legislation, American Rescue Plan, infrastructure, healthcare, Biden presidency, and the Build Better Act. And these by themselves would be great debate topics. They would be certainly good platforms for both parties. However, I took it a step further, and I split the data to reflect tweets only from each specific party. Now, doing so would allow me to run models based on GOP or Democrat-specific corpuses. And as with any topic model, the higher weights we see per word, the higher the purity of the topic. With the GOP, they're certainly talking about Joe Biden as topic 0. And even though there's some topic bleed with other words like crisis and failed, looking at the tweets with these other words assured me that it was still Biden that they were talking about. Looking at the 7 topics from the GOP ranked by reach, their topics are still on board with their politics, meaning they're mostly negative, which we see with the negative compound scores from VADER. We expect them to be more critical of Democratic policies. However, the last 3 topics are all about Biden. And at first I was kind of iffy about this, but I had to separate them as 3 because given the word list of each and their weights and confirming tweets from each of those lists, they really are talking about 3 things. Joe Biden, the person, the people under the Joe Biden administration, and then the Joe Biden administration policies, all 3 separate topics and tweets that reflect that. So this shows that they're still focused on character politics instead of policy, but given the reach, it seems that this is actually working well for them still. Looking at the Democrats, we see that the words are more spread out than the GOP. The weights reflect that more clearly. And again, looking at individual tweets, using the words helps solidify the topics. Notice how
Sorry.
Now, the 7 topics are quite different than the GOP, all positive compound scores, meaning that the sentiment of their tweets are all positive. and the topics are more diverse and not all at all centered at a particular person or group. Looking back at the full corpus, let's look at reach and how it translates to how effective topics are received. You'll notice that when talking about voting legislation, it's really popular with Democrats, not so much with the Republicans. But if you look at how they talk about Biden himself, the Republicans are talking about him, but more negatively. The Democrats are talking about less about Biden, but mostly positive with their compound scores. Finally, I created some trigrams from the entire corpus, modeling them separately as Democrats and Republicans to get separate lists. They're often used in natural language processing to perform statistical analysis, and in our case, to decipher possible topics. The two lists shed more light about what the two parties are focused on, and we see that the negative compound scores for the GOP reflected that these topics are mostly bad stuff, fear-mongering, et cetera. On the other hand, the Democrats are all about the laws and policies that are about helping the American people and their needs. Overall, I'd say both GOP and Democrats can certainly build platforms around these topics that we discovered from this project. This marks the end of my presentation. Thank you for taking the time to watch.